Hi everyone, welcome to today's instalment of the 1 Year On series. Today, a year ago, I was given the opportunity to go and collect some of mine and my daughter's possessions. My daughter goes to school in the village, so I had been doing this school run with my mum for most of the week, but obviously for this one I went alone. The day before had been pretty uneventful, really. There had been a few text messages and a few phone calls between me and Mr. C, but he'd been quite preoccupied with work. I had very few things with me at my mum and dad's house. I had gone to work in my mum's clothes the couple of days before, and I was borrowing underwear from my sister. Fortunately, my daughter had pyjamas and school uniform at my mum and dad's house, so she was okay. Uh, but we'd agreed that we weren't going to discuss our relationship, and he'd promised that he wouldn't bring it up and that he understood that I was there to collect clothes, toiletries, and toys for my daughter. So I took my daughter to school that morning, and then I made the 2 minute journey down the hill to what was now my old house. I knocked on the door and he opened it and said that I didn't need to do that. My dog greeted me, and I'll just talk about my beautiful dog in another instalment. Um, but he suggested that we had a cup of tea and that we sat on the sofa because it was more comfortable than the kitchen chairs. And he was buoyant and he was smiley, and I was very nervous. I reminded him that I was there for my stuff, and he said that he knew and that he was just being friendly, and some other cliches he'd probably heard on the television. So we drank the tea, and I stood up and said that I was going to get my things together. And he looked at me with these puppy dog eyes that he'd probably mastered long before we were together, but he knew they worked on me. I told him that I wasn't there to discuss this, that I didn't know what exactly was going to happen next, and that I did know that I just had no more energy left for our relationship, and I wasn't going to go through another second of stress with this pregnancy. He told me to sit back down, and he started to point out all the things that I had done to invite the stress. I stopped him and said that I wasn't here for this. And he said that I wasn't taking anything until we had talked. And he launched full flow into how I'd handled the past week badly, how he was fed up with having to wait for responses from my text messages, and for not knowing where I was or what I was doing all the time. He decided we should have another cup of tea, and I wanted out, but I was scared. I could feel where this was going, and I didn't know what to do. I had given myself a pep talk before, but now I was sat there at his mercy, frightened about what was going to happen next, and straight back into survival mode. I didn't have the energy to fight or fly, and so I froze. He went towards the kitchen, and I said I would pack up some of the bits whilst he made the tea. And he started shouting again, and so I said that I wouldn't bother taking any things today and that I'd collect them another day and I'd just go. He said I wasn't going anywhere. He couldn't believe my cheek, and he stormed into the kitchen. When Mr. C had gone to the coronavirus examination centre, he'd taken my phone. He had said that it had a better battery and more data, and so he took it and I had his phone. When I fled the house that day, I had grabbed his phone. I presume mine was still in his pocket. I can't exactly remember, but I had his phone and he had mine. And so we needed to swap. And so both phones were on the kitchen table along with my car keys. And he was in there full of rage, and I had no escape. Now, I didn't want my stuff and I didn't want the phones, but I did need the keys to get out. After a little while, he beckoned me into the kitchen and said that I was just here for the phone, and asked me what the real reason was that I didn't want to be with him anymore. Now, the accusations were the thing that used to get to me the most, because the implication that it was anything other than his behaviour, along with the idea that I had been anything less than faithful all the way through our relationship, always used to strike a nerve with me, and it always got me to respond. Not only does it go against my moral code, we spent every waking minute either together or in near constant contact, so the suggestion that I could be unfaithful was just utterly absurd. And yet he would still accuse me, and I would still try to defend myself. I told him that I wasn't here for this and that I needed a phone and I didn't care which one it was. And so he decided that he would swap the SIM cards over so he could have my phone, which was more expensive, a bigger screen, better phone, and I could have his. I stood and watched him swap the SIM cards over angrily, and he was going on about how this was all the proof that he needed that I was a liar and a cheat. And I told him to just keep the phones. And he told me to fuck off. And then he reached down and he grabbed whatever was closest and he threw a handful of tobacco in my face. I was dumbstruck. For a moment, I just stood there, and then I grabbed the keys and I ran out of the back door, down the alley at the side of the house, into my car. He chased me out of the house and he was shouting about the phone, and I told him no more, and I got in the car and I reversed it to leave. Once I was facing the right way, I realised I was shaking, and I just burst into tears, and I just carried on driving with tears streaming down my face. I just wanted to get away as far as possible. After I'd been driving for about 2 miles, I looked in my rearview mirror and he was there. He was flashing his lights and speeding right up behind me. I was so scared. I could see him behind the wheel like this angry monster, and he was leant right forward and he was screaming at me to pull over. And as we approached a roundabout, he overtook me and slammed his brakes on. And before I could even think about it, I went around him and around the roundabout the wrong way. And he sped up behind me and he was waving the phone, and I knew that he needed a way to contact me, and I didn't want him to chase me to my parents' house, and I couldn't believe that I'd just driven around this roundabout the wrong way, and so I stopped. He came to the window and I opened it a tiny bit and I told him to pass me the phone through it. And as this was happening, a car pulled up behind and a man got out and asked if everything was okay. And Mr. C just pushed the phone through the window, turned to speak to this guy, and I just drove off. To this day, I have no idea what was said, but I will be forever grateful to that man for stopping. So wherever you are, thank you. I really feel like I was saved that day from an escalation of just awful drama, and so I drove back to my parents' house. Thank you for listening to today's instalment. There are quite a few things that come up in today's account that I would like to open out for discussion if you're watching this inside the Facebook group. If not, head over to the Facebook group and join us to talk about them. The first thing I want to talk about is the way that Mr. C lulled me into a false sense of security about visiting the house, and then once I was there, used his familiar territory to really exact control over me, and the lessons that we can take from putting ourselves in situations which, despite giving ourselves all the pep talk or feeling like we can handle them, we just don't know how these things can escalate. And a dominator character like an abuser will use every single available opportunity to exact that control, and protecting ourselves from it invariably means that we need to involve a third party or the police when it comes to recovering possessions. The other thing we'll be discussing is about the important documents, because one of the reasons I was adamant about going to the house that day is because I wanted to get my passport and my driving licence. I hadn't told him that, but I planned to just kind of grab them and sneak them in with the stuff when I collected it. But obviously I was never given the opportunity to do that day. And so we'll be discussing some of the most important things to take if you're in the situation where you are planning your escape. As always, if you want to be notified of new videos, you can turn the notifications on in your posts, or you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, or you can head over into the Facebook group where you'll get notified of any new videos. And my inbox is always open for anybody who wants to reach out and talk about things that might have come up for them. So I look forward to seeing you again soon, and have a lovely day.